Welcome everybody, hello. To this, the last bite-sized session in Holborn of 2016. We've had a great calendar of speakers across the best part of this year, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce another of those great speakers to you today. Welcome also to our colleagues across the country who are joining us by VC, you're very welcome. Before we get on to the matter in hand, just to flag a couple of things to you that are coming up from a bite-sized point of view. We've one remaining bite-size to take place in Anstey Park this year around chimp management, which was very popular when we held it in Holborn, so I'd really advise any of you that are based in Anstey or who are travelling to Anstey to put that in your diary. And we've got a big one coming up in Holborn in the middle of January, and that's with Ruby Wax, talking about connecting with others. And there's one ask I'd have of you. I know a number of you, because I can see from the faces in the room, have been to previous bite-size this year. We're really keen to understand what's working for you, how can we make them better, what sort of speakers would you be interested in hearing from throughout 2017. So there's a survey online. You can find it through the Yammer group or through the Store Support Centre news page on our Sainsburys. It only takes a couple of minutes. So I'd really ask you to take 2 minutes out of your diaries to look at that survey and give us your input so we can continue to provide a fantastic calendar of events for you next year. But on to today's speaker. You'll know that through Bite Size, what we try to do is sometimes look at technical skills to make us really effective, but oftentimes we try and invite speakers who are here to broaden our perspectives and perhaps make us think a little bit differently or a little bit more deeply about things that we encounter in our personal and our professional lives. You'll also know that we launched Embrace the Difference, our campaign around inclusion in October of this year, and I know a number of you are wearing the badge with pride and will have been involved with huddles around some of the scenarios we set and so forth. At the heart of Embrace the Difference is our desire to create a really inclusive workplace at Sainsbury's. We pride ourselves on being a great place to work, but as part of that, it's vital that all of our colleagues feel that they can come to work and be their true selves. Because if they can do that, they'll be happier personally and they'll be much more productive at work. And part of embracing the difference is understanding difference in all of its guises. There's the obvious stuff we talk about male, female, about race, about sexual orientation, but there are areas such as gender identity, which are perhaps less familiar to some of us, and which we really need to understand if we're going to be the best colleagues that we can to one another. And so I'm delighted that we've been joined today by Rikki Arundel, who's going to talk a bit about her journey and her perspective on inclusion. And I won't say too much and steal Rikki's thunder, but Rikki was a very successful business person with a motivational speaking company where she focused specifically on financial services and technology, a respected motivational speaker who in fact founded the Professional Speakers Association. But in the early 2000s, Rikki came to the conclusion she needed to come out as a trans woman and undertake that journey herself. And pretty much overnight, that very successful business collapsed. And I think there was an awful lot of learning for Rikki and those around her at that time. And so Rikki's going to spend the best part of the next hour talking a bit about the insights she's gained. There'll be an opportunity at points in the presentation for us to ask questions as well. And I'd like to welcome Rikki on stage.
Is it a boy or is it a girl? It's the very first question everybody asks about us, isn't it? The moment we're born, is it a boy or a girl? Why are we so obsessed with gender? Because what would happen if I said to you, no, we're not going to make that decision yet. We're going to let the child grow up and decide for itself what gender it wants to be. What kind of challenge would that give for you in terms of engaging with that child? Well, the first thing is, you haven't got any pronouns anymore. You can't use her or him. It's going to be it or they or So automatically what we find is that gender is so embedded into our way of life that the moment you change it, everything changes. Everything I know about someone starts with understanding their gender. So take away that gender, utter confusion. The most common comment I hear from people is, I feel I'm going to drop myself in it. I'm going to say something that's going to offend them or offend me. I don't know what to say. I feel uncomfortable. Now, it's really strange. What happens when you feel uncomfortable with someone? What sort of thing do you do if you're not comfortable with someone? Avoid eye contact, deal with them a bit more quickly and abruptly, try to get rid of this problem as quickly as possible. Have you ever been treated like that by someone? Have you ever been treated by someone who you know isn't comfortable with you or doesn't really like you, or they're too busy with something else? How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel as a customer when you're trying to engage? When the person you're trying to deal with is far too interested or uncomfortable with you? It messes up the relationship. The person goes away and their feeling is, won't go back there again. They're very unfriendly. And it was nothing to do with being unfriendly. It was that you were uncomfortable and couldn't hide it. Even though you tried, you couldn't hide it from that other person. So today I'm going to look at that sort of thing. Now, I have to say this whole, is it a boy or a girl, doesn't stop. For most of us, it does. For most people, you ask it when they're a baby, that's it. We sort of put the pink clothes on and everything, or the blue clothes. And from that point onwards, the child looks male or female, and we don't have to ask the question. I keep on getting asked it. Kids especially, are you a man or a woman? I always say no, just to keep them guessing. And then they follow it up with, so do you go to bed with men or women? Darling, at my age, there's so little choice, I hardly like to limit my own. And then the big one. Have you had it cut off? Now you think, no, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be as abrupt as that. No, of course you aren't. Adults aren't. So you've been through the whole thingy. It's the same question. What have you done? I'm going to come back to this towards the end. Yeah, what I do with my body is my business. And I need to start to look at an issue here, because we get confused about what is sex and what is gender, don't we? Everybody gets confused about it. I do remember I was talking to Mel earlier on. She's got a family up in Beverley. Well, I was at Beverley Town Hall, and I was going to a meeting, and the receptionist gave me the badge and everything. I said, okay, fine, I'll just get someone to take you to the meeting. And she looked across, she said, excuse me, could you take this person? The big problem is, if you haven't thought about it in advance, you will get messed up. If someone changes gender at work and you receive a phone call and someone says, they were Bill, now it's Mary, can I speak to Bill? What do you say? Do you say, oh, it's Mary now, I'll put you... If you haven't thought about how to handle the question, when it hits you and you're on the phone, what do I say? And suddenly... So today is about trying to think about those kind of things, because you will engage with trans people. You will engage with trans people at work, as customers. You will engage with people where it's not clear. And we're going to try and get to understand a lot of that. So let's just start with this whole thing, sex and gender. What is sex? What is gender? Now, I'm going to ask you just for a minute, just to discuss this. Sex and gender. We use these two terms, we throw them around interchangeably. You see application forms and forms for different things. Some say sex, male F, some say gender MF. Sometimes they got a whole various options, MF or other, or refuse to say all sorts of things that people are playing with to try and be PC and not upset everybody. But let's just understand what's sex, what's gender. So just for 1 minute, just with the people next to you, just discuss briefly, what do you think is the difference between sex and gender? So hands up if you found actually that was a more difficult question than you expected. That's the first thing, okay? Let me tell you the truth. When I changed gender, Deb was saying, when I changed gender, literally that was it, the end of the world. The financial service industry said, not interested in you at all. And within 6 months, I'd had like one booking. I even had people cancel on the phone. When I said, oh, I've changed gender, oh my God, no, I'm sorry, I'm cancelling. And put the phone down on me. So it was that brutal. People just could not cope with it. And it's all about, I don't have a problem, you understand. It's not me. It's just other people won't be able to cope with this. Our clients won't be able to handle this. Our members won't be able to handle this. The other people at work, I'm fine with it, but it's the other people, you understand? I remember a trans woman friend of mine went to do a job working in a charity shop, and she arrived and the manager said, oh, I hadn't realised. Oh, perhaps you could work in the back. Yeah, this is just life when you're different, when you have some kind of difference around you. So, M or F, male or female? Which one is it now? What do you think? What is sex? That's biology, okay. It's what you're born with. Any other thoughts on that? It's your biology. Well, let's just get this clear, okay? There is an elephant in the room and everybody is ignoring it. And the elephant in the room is that sex is first and foremost about bonking. It is about sexual activity. When you're having a chat about sex, you are not talking about whether somebody is male or female, are you? Okay? You don't go home and have gender with your partner. You have sex. It's a clear, distinct difference. And that's what we think about. Now, the problem is that because sex is all about that, we have this massive issue about it. I don't know whether you remember that Janet Jackson was on stage once and her top came slightly undone and her left nipple was shown. 7,000 people swamped the switchboard within 5 minutes to complain. The previous day, they'd shown somebody blown up by a bomb in Iraq with bits of body all over the place, and 4 people complained. What is it about our priorities, about what's offensive? So we have this big thing. So it's primarily about that. And of course, you can have sex with same-sex partners, with opposite-sex partners. You can have sex in groups. You can do it with same-sex and opposite-sex partners. You can do sex on computers. It's called cyber sex. You can do it all on your own. You can do it with animals. It's called bestiality, and it is illegal. Okay, so sex. And there's a whole set of rules around sex, which are completely different from, what you are now. It gets drawn into it. The problem here we have is that if I take the word sex and put it into any compound word like homosexual, what does that make you think about? Sorry? It makes you instantly think about the wrong thing. About gay sex, about people, and it's actually worse than that. It actually makes you immediately think about, it's all about anal sex. And yet, huge numbers of gay people never engage in that. That said, large numbers of heterosexual couples do engage in anal sex. This is nothing to do with whether you are gay or straight. It's anal sex. When it was first made illegal in 1533 by Henry VIII, it was men, women, or animals. It didn't matter who it was. The act, called the Buggery Act, it was at the time, but that act made it illegal, full stop. Now, so that's the first thing we've got to think about. Now, transsexual, what happens with transsexual when you think about that? What does that take your mind to? Because I've used the word sex in it, the immediate thought is, what have you done with your genitals? What's happened? Who do you have sex with? So the word transsexual makes people start to think about sexual activity and what's going on with how you do sexual activity when you change gender, instead of thinking, how do you live in a different gender? Because I can tell you the hardest thing of all is nothing to do with all that. The hardest thing of all is walking down the street and not being terrified. We'll come to more of that in a minute. So, yes, it's also about biology. When you're born, then they have, how do they determine sex? They have a quick look at the genitals. Got a penis, it's a boy. Hasn't, it's a girl. Oh, don't know what that is. Okay, so we've got some who we're not sure about. But largely, we're looking at presence or absence of a penis in order to determine sex. So it's about body parts. It's also about hormones. Prior to 1992, all female athletes, especially if you won a race, would have had to have been sex tested. What do you think that would have entailed? What would they have done to sex test? Check your body to start with, but that's the first step. But it goes beyond that. Check your hormones. Have you got too much testosterone? Because if you've got too much testosterone, that might give you a competitive advantage over other female athletes. And this is what happened in South Africa, you remember a few years ago? And she now has to have regular treatment to keep that testosterone level down. It happened in Eastern Europe as well, we know the same thing. And also we check the chromosomes. XX for female, XY for male. And a lot of women, not huge numbers, but quite a significant number of women have XY chromosomes, the male chromosomes, and vice versa. Men have XX. Well, back in the day, if you had the wrong chromosomes, that was it. banned from competitive sport. Now, fortunately, we've got past that now. In most places, not everywhere, but most places now, trans women can now compete as women as long as they are going through all the process. They have the right levels of hormones. They normally got to have had surgery, although we're even trying to get rid of that. The Olympic Committee is saying, no, it shouldn't be about whether someone has had surgery. Otherwise, we're forcing people to go through surgery when actually that's not the issue. So, we've also got those people who are born somewhere in between. Now, actually, I believe, and a lot of people believe, that all transgender issues are intersex. And the reason for that is because we don't understand what it is that makes someone suddenly feel that this is the wrong body. We don't get it. We don't understand it at all. Because I show a video on all my workshops about a young child, and the big comment that most people say is, oh, I can't believe that a child who's just 2.5, 3 years old is trying to cut his penis off because it doesn't belong there. What makes a child so adamantly insistent that he's a girl when his body clearly is a boy? What is it that's going on? Well, it's something to do, we believe now, there's a lot of work being done in Holland. They believe that somewhere during fetal development, you're supposed to get certain balance of hormones, testosterone and estrogen. It's the testosterone that's the key. Because if you don't get testosterone, all babies default to female, end of story, okay? Testosterone is what makes the difference. Now, even if you have XY chromosomes, if you don't get testosterone, most times the baby will default to female. But it's very difficult to figure out what's going on, because in order to look at your brain, we've actually got to take the brain out and cut it up. Well, you can't put that back together again afterwards. So we have to wait until someone's dead. And we don't know if it happened during life because they took pills and all various different things. So it's very, very hard. We can do MRI scans and look at brain activity. So we can see there are some differences. But there's enough people doing research saying, no, there's not. So we've got this huge, big battle. I did my MSc when I changed gender. I realized that I had to do something so that people would actually employ me because I was transgender rather than not employ me because I was transgender. So I went off to Hull University and did a master's degree in gender research. Sex and gender, it's a 20-credit module at master's degree level, just so you know that minute discovering it was a complex problem, you weren't alone. It is a complex issue. And people do whole PhDs just on exploring the differences in sex and gender. So, intersex. Intersex is when someone, in some way or another, their body isn't completely and wholly male or female. And what we do know is that by around about 2 or 3, if you're born cisgendered, I'm going to use a term which you may not have heard before, this term cisgendered has arrived because we had transgender. If you're not transgender, what are you? The moment you say normal, that makes me somehow abnormal. So we said, no, we don't want that. So we'll have to have a word. It's like homosexual came along and somebody said, well, what if you're not homosexual? Well, we can't just say normal because we don't want that. So heterosexual came after homosexual as a label. Okay, just in order to try and describe it. And of course, we've changed it now to gay and straight and all sorts of things. Now, intersex is where some part of your body is not the normal for male development. Now, what we do know is that this has been happening for thousands and thousands of years. So it's not like saying it's abnormal, it just happens. It happens in animals, it happens in humans. Not everybody comes absolutely normal. And I wonder how much difference there is, because a lot of us are socially pressured into performing gender according to the set of rules that says you've got to be a boy, you've got to be a girl. And how much pressure do we put on our little girl to have pigtails and pretty clothes? And how much pressure do we put on our boys to be good at rugby and rough and tumble? We do an enormous amount to pressure people into these stereotypical roles. Once we've clicked the it's a boy or a girl, that's when we shift across to gender, because gender, it's a social construction. It's how society treats you differently because of the sex you were identified at birth. And it is hugely different. I'm not going to do a huge amount today, but just some of the things that we actually control through gender, our language. the kind of education, I mean, girls for years and years and years weren't allowed to be educated. We've still got this problem in parts of Africa, parts of the Middle East. Women still cannot undergo proper education. Nigeria has huge problems with it. There's problems in Saudi Arabia. Your roles. Some societies still have fixed, clear roles. And I'll bet in your head, you've still got some of those roles embedded there, because we've done experiments with kids and asking questions. By the age of 3, kids have got the gender roles. Mummies look after the babies, daddies go to work. It's in there. Because all the videos they're seeing, all the talk they're seeing, everything around them is supporting these differences. Our clothing, our appearance, our expectations. Yeah, a little boy asked, can a boy wear girls' clothes? No. Why? Because people will laugh at me. So we know that there are things you can't do, things you can't perform, and that makes the whole thing different. When you don't feel comfortable with being the same as everybody else, we're actually pressured into having to hide that. And it's not just fear, it is absolute terror. Just to give you some idea of how frightened. I was driving my car once, 1976, my wife at the time and my son were away. She'd gone to see her parents, and I was out driving the car, cross-dressed, having a bit of fun. It's late at night, because they always did that, because you're less likely to get sort of red. And I'd forgotten that the front light on the car wasn't working very well. I saw the police car, I thought, oh, no. And as I went past, he pulled out. I thought, oh, God, no. Now, in 1976, the police were not very good friends to the trans community. There was a very high chance of being taken down to the police station, under the suspicion that I am dressed as a woman in order to somehow get other women by making them feel that I was another. Anyway, I thought, no, I can't do this. I can't stop. So I thought, no, if it gets out, if I go to the police, if it gets in the press, that's it. My job's gone. I was so terrified. I thought, right, I'm not stopping. I just drove home. I was only half a mile away, but they were flashing their lights. The blue lights were on. I thought, no chance. I'm not stopping. Just went down this, got out of my car, rushed in the house, locked the door behind me. They had a look at the car, and they left, thankfully. But by this time, I was getting the nail polish off and taking off them. I was not going to, no way they were going to catch me. That's the level of terror. I'd rather be arrested for failing to stop than risk the possibility of being humiliated for who I was. So, there we go. So, let's have a look at some of the other issues that go on there. And I call this the pinkification of girls. Do you know, we knocked this on the head in the 70s. And suddenly it came back through the 80s and 90s. We're beginning to get in control of it again, but just look at this. This is a toy. How many of you have spotted the little badge in the top left-hand corner of that toy? Girls only. What is that saying to boys? It's okay to make a mess because the girls will clean it up. How is that going to help for future marriages and relationships where we're trying to get an equal partnership in a relationship? How many of you play with Lego? Have you done that? Is that a boy's toy or a girl's toy? Yeah, well, it was, and then along came Lego Technics and Lego Castles and Lego Cowboys, and it became a bit of a boy's toy, so they've now redressed the balance with Lego Friends. Note the pink bricks. Note that all the characters here are female, where all the other characters in Lego, apart from one, are male. And you can do interior design, and you can do beauty salons, and you can do swimming pools and the whole thing. And wait for it, they've simplified the bricks. Kid you not. I kid you not. Now, I've noticed they're beginning to change this. They've got now, Lego Friends has now brought out a supermarket and a few other things to help make it a little bit more. Boots, the chemist, got themselves into a bit of trouble recently. They just, a few years ago now, but they decided they were going to go the route of so many organizations and have a boys' toys area and the girls' toys area. And already the manufacturers are pink, branding all the girls' stuff pink and all the boys' stuff blue. So into the blue boys' toys area, they placed microscopes and chemistry sets. Now, anybody hazard a guess at who is Britain's #1 employer of women with chemistry degrees? they got quite a lot of reaction back, saying this is not okay. And within weeks they said, whoa, sorry, we're not going to do it. And a campaign started, said, let's toys be toys, and we're now beginning to see the result of that. Toys R Us, The Entertainer, most supermarkets, most toy stores are now beginning to say, let's mix it all up. Let the kids pick what they want. Let's don't brand stuff and put stuff together on a gendered basis. We gender too much, and that, making boys line up here, girls. How many of you have been watching I'm a Celebrity as a matter of interest? Notice the boys versus girls thing, and Martin joined the girls crew the other day, didn't he? So it was so we still do this boys versus girls thing, and it really is a challenge. Now, here's an interesting thought about some of the other embedded challenges we have in trying to tackle this idea. This is a set of leadership qualities I'd like you to think about: powerful, assertive, decisive, competitive, logical, focused. In your mind, are you seeing a man or a woman from that description? Sorry?
I know that's supposed to be a man, but I'm not seeing that because that's the type of thing that they all say about men.
No, you're absolutely right. But the problem is that that's what happens now. If I describe a woman with those adjectives, what sort of image do we have now of the woman? I didn't say that, but you're not alone in thinking that. It's all of a sudden, it's a negative quality. So what is a set of very positive qualities when we use them to describe a man? When we use those same words to describe a woman, suddenly they become negative. So when I describe another person as cautious, caring, emotional, supportive, nurturing, compassionate, aren't those good management qualities? In the right, tell me, which manager would you prefer to be handling the healthcare department you've had to go to? Number 2. But the thing is, we tend to think, oh, that's more those are more female qualities. And if a man, we describe him with those, well, it's a bit of a wuss. You see, all the way through our language, you will find that there are things that we use which we describe men as, and there are things we describe women as. The whole structure of the way in which we gender our society is to separate them completely with sets of words that actually are not allowed to cross over. Now, social identity. There's a whole social identity theory. Gender is part of this whole social identity. It's not just the one thing. It's not just my gender, because our identity is based upon the membership of different groups. One of those is about our membership of the gender. But there's a whole bunch of them. Just look at this sort of thing. We've got family, town, workplace, age. You create that. This isn't to say social identity is wrong, but aren't you within Sainsbury's creating an environment where people feel part of an extended family, part of a team, and you feel proud to be in Sainsbury's rather than the other? I shan't mention one of those names. Do you see what I mean? You've got that little bit of competitiveness that starts to go on. Did we do better than them? Did we? And that starts to happen. The same with your football team. The problem is that this social identity can lead to a negative approach. So what happens is that we can start to create them and us. I live in Hull. Everybody in Hull supports Hull City. You have to, despite the fact they're at the bottom of the league again. But at least they're in the first division. At least they're in the Premiership for our city of culture. And we're bragging like mad about the fact that Hull is now City of Culture. Who'd have thought it? No one. In Hull, where's Hull? God, it's somewhere at the end of the M62. Yeah? You only get there because you took a wrong turning on getting onto the motorway. Yeah, people don't go to Hull unless you had a real purpose in needing to be there. But we do get this them and us thing. And in Hull, we have a problem. Outside of Hull is the East Riding of Yorkshire. Now, anybody who lives in the East Riding of Yorkshire definitely does not live in Hull. Okay, battles with the Boundary Commission not to have Hull on their address because they're in Cottingham and Anlaby and all these lovely names, but not all. And you can't tell the boundary between the village I live in and Hull. It's just, you just merge into Hull. But, oh my God, I'm surprised they haven't got barriers that they're checking passports as you cross. But that's the way we create this them and us thing, and that builds up to, we enhance our self-image. Boys are better than girls, sugar and spice and all things nice, all these little poems and rhymes, all about football teams have songs, towns do the thing to big themselves up against the other towns, and then you end up in the league tables of the league. How many of you live in a town which is end up in the bottom 10 of worst towns to live in Britain? No? Hull's been there regularly, so we're quite familiar with that whole idea. And it's not. Hull's a really lovely city. I like it. I chose to go there. A lot of people do. It's got one of the best universities in the country. It has a lot of great qualities. It has got some downsides. But then so's Birmingham. Just the entrance road alone. But do you see what happens is we do all this thing and we create humour and we create stereotyping, and as a consequence we start to discriminate against people from being the other, being in the other group, not the same, being different. Creates stereotypes, it creates discrimination, creates prejudice, and it creates bias. And that's what we've got to tackle. It's okay to have this identity. It's okay to get onto that identity, but we've got to be careful when we use that as a weapon against and use it to put other people down. Big us up, put somebody else down. And that's the sort of thing that starts to happen. So let's have a look at this gender identity. As I said, we know that there's this difference between the brain. So we know that physically there is a difference, but the problem is the differences are so tiny that you need a microscope to see them. So somebody said to me, one part of the brain in men is generally 50% bigger than in women. I said, great, which bit is it? It's in the hypothalamus, and it's actually the size of a pinhead. So 50% bigger than a pinhead. Yeah, that's not exactly a huge mammoth part of the brain. But this is the difficulty with these tiny little bits. Is it nature? Is it nurture? I believe, because I tried to fix this. I tried to sort of, just live my life, and because I knew that coming out, bear in mind, I started this journey. I knew I was trans in 1957 at the age of 7 years old. I also knew not to tell anyone. Couldn't tell my friends, couldn't tell my parents. Now, as it turned out, my parents actually clicked on, or school clicked on. At the age of 6, I was taken to a child psychiatrist because I couldn't get on with children of my own age. They couldn't quite understand it, and they did some assessments, and the assessment says, this child is 2 years ahead of their age mentally. So I was put up a year in class at the time, and that was put down as the reason. Now, when I look back at it, I think, if they had assessed a girl against a boy, would they have come up with the same conclusion? Yes, they would, because we know that at that age, girls seem to be a year or two ahead of boys mentally. It slows down for girls when they start to hit puberty, and boys catch up and everything starts to move on. But what we've got was they were not looking at the right thing. They were assessing, why didn't I get on with other boys? If they'd looked, they'd have seen I got on with girls quite well. Perfectly well. The problem was because I was a boy, all that social gendering stuff was stopping those relationships from building up because the girls saw me as a boy. They weren't able to see me as a girl. And of course, at that time, if you turned out to be gay, which was what people would have tended to think, there weren't that many trans people around, homosexuality, that was an imprisonable offence. Until 1967, so nobody ever mentioned that. Lots of gay people, trans people just got married, got on with life, kept it a real secret. You didn't want us to know. It's still there. Yeah, you've got to remember, there's still people like me, born and those in that era, who've grown up knowing that this is not okay, and our religions are still pumping out the stuff that says it's wrong. It's very, very hard. We've got equality law, which is now saying can't discriminate, but still people challenging it all the time. So, so what we've got, it was referred to as a gender identity disorder. Now, the trans community said, no, we don't like that, and we've battled like mad. 2 years ago, they finally said, okay, it's not gender identity disorder, it's an unpronounceable word. It's gender dysphoria. So now it is a condition where the person is really distressed with the body that they have because they have a male body or they have a female body. And that sense of distress is so great that actually their life might be at risk. Around 50% of young trans people attempt suicide. 50%. If a child is not supported by parents, not supported by family and children, they are 4 times more likely to become involved in drug use when they get older, to become involved in the sex industry and selling sex, to become HIV positive, and to actually commit suicide. So we know very clearly from what we've seen over the past few years, the only way to handle somebody having gender dysphoria is acceptance and treating people as human beings and actually embracing them and loving them as other people. It's just, don't exclude them. If we feel excluded, then, well, think about how you would feel if constantly everybody thought you were a freak and excluded you and pushed you out. Because that's what happens, the bullying at school and the way people are treated. So, and not all people change their gender. Not everybody goes and has surgery. Not everybody goes through that whole process. In fact, most people don't. I'm going to look at some of the statistics in a minute, but we tend to think transgender is all about people going through gender, having the change, going through gender surgery, having breast removal, all that. Actually, most people don't do that. Most people learn to cope in some way or another. I ran a small support service for about 3 years until, unfortunately, the funding all went to pieces. But have a think about this. We talk about genders as if it's just male and female. Why? But maybe there's more. Are all men the same? Are all women the same? When I was doing my master's degree, I had a huge argument with somebody because I said to one, well, you're dressed in a masculine way. She said, why does this have to be masculine? Why can't this just be another form of femininity? I said, because all the clothes you're wearing are male, and if we call that another form of femininity, we lose, let's not even bother with the whole idea of masculine and feminine, because so we have this concept of masculine and feminine, but the problem is that a lot of people don't want to be labelled with these things. And this is what, all of these people, I mean, who knows what gender they are? Who knows what body they are? Would you have any idea? There are people from all over the world, the Hijra in India, there are people from North American Indians, jazz musicians, singers, drag queens. Everybody says, oh, drag queens are different. They're not the same because drag queens are they're just gay men who like to dress up. Well, why? Because most gay men I know don't want to dress up in female clothing and don't want to spend their life performing as a woman. So what is it makes them want to do that? I ask them and they say, because I'm good at it, because I love it, because I look gorgeous. So I think, well, yeah, this is who they are. They actually like the image and the way that they are. And they also like to live as men as well. And they play both sides of it. So we've just got to understand that we have a huge diversity. It's not just about these small little groups with labels. We've got this massive diversity. And look at this. This is current models. These are some of the models currently on the stage. Now, which are male and which are female? There's your challenge. So I can tell you now that, and I've forgotten her name because sorry? Andre, yes. And she actually has now come out and said she's trans. But for a long time she wasn't. She was saying, no, I'm not. And Gregory Gorgeous is another one who didn't identify as trans, just was gorgeously beautiful. Some are now saying, okay, I'm trans. Others are saying, no, I'm not. Ruby Rose saying, no, I'm female. But she's identifying in a very masculine way. Gender neutral, exactly. A lot are coming out as gender neutral, as is Rain Dove. But Rain Dove mostly models male clothing. So, what we're seeing is younger people beginning to change this, moving into this whole area of gender neutral. And so what happens is when we start to look at labels, God, just gets nuts, isn't it? Transgender, transvestite, transsexual, yeah, cross-dresser, intersex, bigender, genderqueer, androgen, drag queen, female impersonator, and there's more, she-male, ladyboy, hydra. You probably won't have heard of most of these. Muse, Ashtame, African, Middle Eastern, yeah, Philippines, India, and that's just some of them. Across the world, we have this whole variety of different genders, different ways in which people are. Some cultures that have 5 genders, some that have 10, some have unlimited ones, some now you can have an X on your passport instead of M or F. Across the world, everything is completely changing. So we have to learn to embrace the fact that we're now beginning to say, people, what gender do you want to be? You pick one. Make it your own. Present yourself the way you want to present yourself and enjoy being who you are. The challenge is what happens when we do that. So, we use generally the term trans or transgender to replace all of those labels as a sort of blanket term. If it's children particularly, we tend to use gender variant. We're increasingly using this whole idea of gender neutral, but it's not. Some people are saying bigender, so we're still playing around with which gender we're going to have here. If someone is trans and they are changing gender, then they will tend to say trans woman. I define myself as a trans woman. So I present myself as female, and I have moved across, and my birth certificate says I'm female, my passport says I'm female. People say, well, why haven't you changed your voice? Because I don't want to, because I'm a speaker. And I'm not going to play around with my voice. I've got a deep voice. Get over it. It's as simple as that. I'm not going to allow society to pressure me into having to perform a particular form of gender. And I know a lot of trans people are so terrified that they feel they've got to hide away and go into stealth, it's called, which is basically to pass so that no one knows. Now, if kids are lucky when they are born and trans, and we can actually get them on hormone blockers at puberty so they don't have to go, the voice doesn't go deep, they don't get breasts, kids can then wait until they're about 14 to 16 years old. We can get them on cross-gender hormones. By 18, they'll be in the gender they feel they ought to have been in, and no one will know apart from their gynecologist or a doctor. And you won't tell. I know trans women now who've got married, never told their husbands. Now, for that reason, there is a law in place, part of the Gender Recognition Act, the law which allows someone to legally change their gender. It's complex, trying to simplify it. You don't need the details, but just to know, we can, once you've gone through that process, and you don't have to have surgery to do this. Once you're living in a different gender, you can then change your gender legally, change your birth certificate. You can change your passport the moment you start the process, but change your birth certificate so you're legally recognized in that gender takes a bit more of a challenge. And you can do that, and that's it. From that point onwards, you live in that gender. If you happen to find out in the course of your work that a colleague had changed their gender, and you mentioned it to someone at home, or you happen to see them coming out and say to your friend, oh, that's the tranny, you've just committed a criminal offence. It can get you 6 months imprisonment and or £5,000 fine. A careless remark that discloses someone's gender, and the reason for that is that you could be putting their life at risk just by a careless remark in a pub or chatting to someone. So it's really important. If you know someone is transgender, you don't tell anyone. If someone at work says, oh, is that a man or a woman, about one of your colleagues who you know changed gender, the answer is whatever gender they present. It's a man or a woman. It's not, oh, they used to be a man, but they're now a woman. That's really important to recognize, because the moment you start to talk about someone's gender, if they have a gender recognition certificate, you immediately put yourself into all kinds of difficulty. And it's because you put their life at risk. And we have so many cases of people who have been beaten up. And last November 20th was Trans Memorial Day, where we remembered once again over 300 trans women around the world beaten to death, trans men just literally brutally killed just because they were trans. So it's a real threat, a real problem, which is why it's there. So, enough of the hard stuff. How many of us are there? Well, about 20,000 have gone through treatment. It's growing at a fairly rapid rate. I've just noticed my time, I'm just going to have to speed up a little tiny bit here. About 6 in every 1,000, almost 1% are gender variant. But there's a lot more when we look at sexual orientation. So it's mostly male to female. When we look at sexual orientation, it's actually 6% of the population. Now, in fact, I think a lot of people who identified in this group of sexual orientation are actually trans people who've just said, look, it's just easier. If I'm a woman who feels I would have been would have preferred to have been born male, but I've got a female body, it's much easier just to identify as lesbian and have a relationship with women and just think, well, this is... For men it's a little bit more difficult, but an awful lot of trans women just say, look, I'm going to identify as gay, and then they become drag queens, they dress up in girly clothes on the night out, they have boyfriends, and they're just very feminine boys. But some go all the way. But what we're talking about is about 10% of the population is probably on that border between, of genders. This book was quite a powerful book, really affected me when I was younger. Why am I afraid to tell you who I am? John Powell in it said, I'm afraid to tell you who I am because if I tell you who I am and you don't like who I am, that's all I have. What's our greatest fear, do you think, in life? Human being's greatest fear. So, loneliness. There? Yes. So? Being accepted. It's nearly. It's a part of rejection. It's being laughed at. Being humiliated. When kids commit suicide, almost always it's because they're being humiliated. They're being bullied by humiliation. What's the easiest way to bully a kid without actually hitting them? Just humiliate them. Get everybody to make them feel stupid. Make them feel a fool. Laugh at them. Stick a kick me thing on the back. Yeah, all those kind of things are what's happening. I'm running slightly on time. Are we okay? I'll keep the. So I'm going to pass the trans journey. I just want to deal with this because I've talked a bit about the trans journey in terms of mine, but harassment. Of all the law that's affecting this is the one piece people haven't understood, and it's the one bit you need to understand. This is the official wording in the Equality Act. Harassment occurs when someone engages in unwanted behavior which is related to a relevant, protected characteristic and which has the purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for that person. So you make a comment to somebody. I'll tell you something that happened here. I went in Primark with a friend, another trans friend, and we were at a desk, and a friend of ours was actually getting another checkout. And the checkout girl looked across, saw us, and then said, oh, bloody trannies shouldn't be allowed. Do you know they let them use the women's changing rooms in here? Shouldn't be allowed. And really had a rant. So our friend came over and said, you'll never guess what she's just said over there. Oh, my friend went nuts. Following day, we phoned the shop and said, look, this was really not okay. Now, all credit to Primark, she was sacked instantly. End of her job. I was in another supermarket with my partner, just dealing with a technical problem which we had with an electronic good. My partner was standing here. I'm talking to the person here. Over there are a couple of people on another counter, and they spotted or heard the voice, and they're having a right laugh. Happens behind my back all the time. But the problem is, my partner could see it because she was standing looking at them. And she was intimidated. She felt that that was a hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment had been created for her. Now, the law says, even if you're not trans, if you're with someone who is, you get the same treatment as if you are trans. If you're with somebody who is black and they get discriminated, or you get discriminated because you're with them, you get the same treatment as if you were black, as if you were Muslim, as if you were old, as if you were disabled. So being associated with, being perceived to be, doesn't matter. If discrimination takes place because of the protected characteristic. Because of gender identity, doesn't matter who you are, you're instantly covered, and harassment is so easy to break the law on. Making a comment, having a joke, you have no idea whether the person you're talking to is in a relationship with a trans person, has trans children, has friends who are trans, feels upset and intimidated by it, is trans themselves but in the closet, is gay and feels, it's so easy. So, right. So we get this, oh my God, that's so gay. How many of you have heard that comment being made? And we say, oh, it doesn't mean the same. And kids are still using it in the schools, and the schools didn't clamp down. Stonewall did a bit of a research. 98% of gay pupils said if they heard that said in the school and nothing was done about it, they felt intimidated, and they felt that they would be that they would actually be discriminated against or bullied if they came out. So, think about this. Even if the language is appropriate, I mean, you get this where some words are, the black community have reclaimed the N-word. But it's not okay even for black people to use that word because it's not okay for others. You have to say, I sometimes use the word tranny. It's used in an offensive way. I've used it today to reflect the way that people have used it in that way. You can't use it. If language is not okay for one group, it's not okay for all. And that's a simple way. Hard, really hard, because your customers are going to come in, they're going to say things, they're going to be inappropriate. And I've been looking through you've got some really great stuff in your in this current program to help give you some idea of how to handle that. So, briefly, what not to say. Are you a man or a woman? Do you have sex with men or women? Have you had the operation? Which toilets do you use? I use toilets appropriate to my gender. I use the female toilets. You pass really well. Pass means, you pretend to be a woman very well. I'm who I am. I can tell you we're a man or a woman. All of these create an uncomfortable conversation. They're the kind of things to just avoid. Just treat people as people. And it all works really, really well. And that's the big driver for all of this. Treat people with dignity and respect. Now, I'm going to just very quickly look at something on this. I talked about these unconscious biases. Our family, our friends, we've seen how gender gets embedded into us in our language, in our schools, in the way. Just look at this. This is actually not to do with gender. This is actually how we embed some concepts of racism into people at schools in a very simple way that people don't get it. This is the map of the world. How many of you are familiar with this map? Okay, we have continents, do we not? The large masses are called continents. How many are there? 7, okay. Just to help. South America, North America, Africa, Australasia, Asia, Europe, and Antarctica. Right? 7 continents. So what is this? This bit up here. How come that's not a continent? It's bigger than South America. Why don't we consider Greenland a continent? Well, because Greenland isn't that big. The map's distorted. All maps are distortions. And Greenland is actually 1/7 the size of South America. It's a small island, relatively, but it looks huge on this map because we've stretched the map at the top. What's the equator? An imaginary line around the centre of the Earth, okay? Centre there means we're going along here. That makes Britain a subtropical climate. Is Britain a subtropical climate? No, it's bloody cold today. Why? Because, actually, the equator's down here. Because we've distorted the map. All maps have to be distorted. What's at the centre of the map? Britain and Europe. How odd. If you were in America, it would be different. The Americans have this map. Okay, with America at the centre and Russia on both sides, which is why they're so paranoid about communism. They think they're surrounded. But it's all based upon a map from the 17th century by Mercator, which is about a navigational map. If we look at the relative size of all these land masses and look at them in their correct relative size, we end up with a world that looks very, very different. Notice how much smaller the Northern Hemisphere suddenly becomes, how much bigger Africa and everywhere else becomes, because that's the reality of the world. But all of our lives, we're watching a map on the schools, we're seeing this map all around, which says the North is bigger, Britain's at the centre of the world. It's a way of actually unconsciously biasing us in favour of this. And of course, if you lived in Australia, you'd look at the map completely differently anyway. So, can you see how simple little things can automate the Janet and John book? We don't see enough diversity in the books that kids are reading. We don't see diversity all around us because we hide it and create normality and then make people different on the outside, and it doesn't really work. So, a couple of little tips. Become aware of your biases. Just look at implicit association tests online. It's really good. Just find out what your bias against. I find I'm biased in favour of people from the LGBT, gay and lesbian, trans people. Embrace difference. Find out about it. Study it. Learn about all these differences, because it's a great, colourful culture that we can learn about. Don't make assumptions. Don't stress. We're all biased in some ways about something. I'm very biased against people who are violent, and I'm going to stay that way. Okay, just a choice. And improve your rapport skills. So, watching the time, we're at 11 o'clock. Just if you've got any questions, let me just quickly deal with those. And I've got one final thing I want to finish off with. So, any questions at all? I think we've got some microphones here. Just
short on time, if there are any burning questions, we've got time for a couple.
Stunned into silence, actually.
You've blown them away.
Okay, well, I will say this. If you've got questions, I mean, sometimes what I find is when I do this, because it's a topic which sometimes people have questions, I'm going to be here, grab me afterwards if you've got a personal question you'd like to ask. Otherwise, you can go on my website. I'll give you the link to the website at the end. I'm more than happy to accept, you just send me a note, and I'm happy to answer that. I just want to come back to this one thing here, just to finish this, just because how many of you are comfortable with this idea? Treat everyone with dignity and respect. Yeah, you're happy. You can all live. That's the basic principles of human rights, the basic principles of equality and diversity law. You're all happy with it. Are you sure? Really? Everyone. Murderers, paedophiles, sex offenders, rapists, terrorists. Treat everyone with dignity and respect. How many of you have now a small problem with it? And I have to admit, I've had some challenges with this, but the problem is, and at the moment, there are some people who would like to change this so that you have to qualify to be treated with dignity and respect, but you can't do that. You cannot actually exempt people from this, because what happens if we make a mistake? Who makes the decision? October 2008, the kids had been around near my house quite a bit. They all knew that there was a trans person there. They always used to come up and have a look, and if they couldn't see me, then they'd throw a stone or throw a stick or come and knock on the window so that their friends could see the local tranny. It was a game the kids played, and they used to come up this 10-foot. We have 10-foots in Hull. It's like a sort of track which runs down the back of properties to collect all the dust carts. So everything was okay. Then October 2008, I got a hole in one of the windows. I thought, and I thought somebody's thrown a stone trying to get my attention, just thrown it a bit too hard, broke the window. A week later, bedroom window, another hole. I thought, this is feeling like somebody's throwing stones with intent to damage my house now. So I made a phone call and phoned the police non-emergency line, and they said, we'll get someone to come around and have a look. Nothing happened. About a week later, I thought there was a hailstorm outside. Could not believe it. Absolute noise. And I opened the French windows at the back. Stones came clattering through. The French window shattered as something hit it and just shattered all the glass. I phoned 999. I said, I'm under attack. I said, it's like urban terrorism. I've got kids shouting abuse and throwing stones. She said, this is misuse of the 999 number. This is simply children causing a nuisance. Please put the phone down and dial the non-emergency number. I was absolutely furious. Now, as it happened, I'm a bit of an activist. I had the personal mobile number of the local chief of police. He got a rant that night. And the following morning, I have the inspector and the area sergeant begging and praying for forgiveness and telling me that they'll be there and they'll have... Well, From that point onwards, every night between about 5:30 and 7:30, between 5 and 20 kids came down this dark back passage where there's no lights at all, throwing stones. They'd come around the front throwing stones. They were standing underneath the cameras right outside of Sainsbury's local, as it happens, but they all had balaclavas on, so nobody could see who they were. Nobody was actually monitoring. Oh, it was a nightmare. I don't know if any of you have ever been under attack by kids. I thought I was pretty brave, but I'd have to tell you, this was absolutely scaring me. I was terrified. I was frightened I was going to go out and come back late and they'd have gone in, smashed the way in, and spray painted the inside of my house. Could have happened to others. So I just, so anyway, we got this one Monday night, and they'd hit the back of the house. They were now throwing mud and everything at the front of the house. They were riding past, throwing mud. They were shouting abuse. I thought, I've had enough. Dignity and respect, forget that. Grabbed hold of a retractable washing line out and went, come on, you little bat! Oh, God, I was so angry. I was furious. How many of you would have been with me at this point? I was ready to take their heads off. Anyway, there's a kid standing there with his mud. I said, what are you doing this for? Well, are you a man or a woman? Do you know, I actually love that question. The moment somebody asks that question, they're saying, I don't understand why you're different. Can you please help me understand? That's really all that's being said. And I got the, have you been a man? Are you a man or a woman? Do you go to bed with men or women? Have you had it cut off? Why are you wearing those shoes? Before I knew what had happened, I had 20 kids standing around me doing a trans awareness workshop on the green outside my house at 8:30 at night. The police eventually arrived, and a couple of them got their names taken. Probably wasn't even the ones that caused the problems. But when the balaclavas came up, I knew at that point, it's all over. Suddenly they understood who I was. Suddenly they understood what was going on. Suddenly somebody had answered all those questions in their head that nobody had bothered to answer, because I treated them with dignity and respect. It's not easy. It doesn't mean people don't get punished for doing something wrong, but the way we treat them will determine whether they're actually going to do it again. Treat everyone with dignity and respect, and we all really can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a fantastic bite size. I kind of quite emotional at the end, actually. I think you might think you know about some of these topics and you read about them, but there's nothing quite like hearing someone's first-hand experience that really opened us up to think not just about trans, but about all aspects of difference. So hopefully that gives you something to go away and think about and share with your teams. We've got the guys from DRP recording this today, so if you've got colleagues who weren't able to make it but would like to see it, it'll be up on our Sainsbury's probably within a few working days. And I really would encourage as many of our colleagues as possible to watch that. A reminder about some forthcoming bite size, don't forget, and the survey again that I asked you about at the beginning, if you could share your thoughts about other speakers like Rikki that we would benefit from hearing from in 2017. I think that's pretty much it from me. Thank you very, very much for joining. I think Rikki made a very kind offer for anyone that might want to ask a question that they didn't want to ask in front of the whole room or that we ran out of time for. So she will be here with us for a few moments. So very welcome to come down and carry on the conversation. Thank you very much.